Hello. So welcome to the Planning Flavors for your OpenStack Cloud session. Just to get things started, a little introduction and background. My name is Craig Anderson. I'm a solutions architect at MIRANTIS. The target audience in this session would be OpenStack providers that are considering specializing their OpenStack offerings using with different types of workloads using Nova flavors. And this session was informed by some insights that came from working with a large OpenStack customer who had a need to support a wide diversity of tenant use cases, which were well suited for differentiation with flavors. So let's start with what is the lurking danger here? What is the thing we're afraid of? So you might have seen something like this in maybe one of your production environments. This was something I found in a production environment where there's some flavors here which seem to start fairly innocently. Your M1's tiny, small, your OpenStack defaults. And then we start to see some other interesting entries here. There's a custom flavor. There's a custom to flavor, an M2.x large, M2.x larger. One wonders when the M2.x largest flavor is going to make an appearance. Vlad, and then I added a couple here just because my awesome flavor and the Bodie McBoatface. So, what's going on here? Well, I think the main problem we see here is in this example, in this production environment, there's operator who really are defining their flavors ad hoc, and they don't really have a plan or process in place to manage those. So we'll talk a little bit about what that plan or process might look like. But first, let's just do a quick overview of our Nova flavors. So what are they? So, okay. We can do a Nova flavor list, and we can see that, there's all this geometry information, the sizing information, the memory, disk, vCPUs. That's a fairly central part of what makes up a flavor. But I suggest not getting too hung up on the sizing, the geometry initially. I'd say come back to that later in the last part of your planning. We're going to focus more on the other dimension of the flavors here, which is the extra specs. So this is kind of a fundamentally different thing here, right? The extra specs of the flavor, the metadata, are where we can define the capabilities that the flavor has to have, or performance characteristics, quality of service parameters, and other things of that nature. So, and this is the part that allows us to specialize the flavors for different use cases and different functions. But do note that in OpenStack, OpenStack merges these two things together. The OpenStack flavor is really a combination of the geometry as well as these capabilities. But for your planning, in terms of your planning, you should really consider these two things separately. So that being said, let's take another look at flavors here, or another way to think about them. So first, just kind of a division of terms here. I didn't come up with this actually myself. This is from Amazon, and I just compiled this information into this form here that you see. But you could conceptually think of flavors as at the top level you have some kind of flavor type. Amazon uses letters, so I just give examples here. Let's say to designate the different specializations that we're talking about. So general purpose compute optimized, storage optimized, network optimized, whatever we're trying to optimize or specialize for. Then we can break that down into the the flavor series. So think about your flavor series in terms of maybe like the generation of the flavor, and in terms of lifecycle management also, and how that ties into your hardware and advancing. Let's say if you have a new generation of hardware and your old hardware is going to go end of life, for example, how that ties into your versioning of those flavor types, which I'm calling the flavor series. And then you can further break down the flavor series into the geometric variations that you want to support. So yeah, and we won't focus on the last part. We'll focus on the first two pieces. There is actually another Brownbag talk tomorrow by Ben Silverman at 12:30, who will talk about the geometry aspect of that planning. So this is kind of, I think, what I consider the key artifact, or the critical artifact you want to produce in your flavor planning if you want to talk about different types of specializations that you want to offer in your platform, which is that I think you want to have some sort of matrix. You want to build a matrix that's going to keep track of all of this information for you to say, okay, what are all my flavor types, and break down the flavor series into, okay, what are all the capabilities that I want to offer? What are the different settings in the metadata settings? Any relevant information that would help convey that to your planning. Now, this isn't something that you would necessarily want to expose to your tenants, but this would be very useful and important for planning. So because without this kind of a consolidated view, that's one of the things that can lead to some of that like flavor proliferation that we saw earlier. So I think this is a pretty key point. So another thing you can do is you can map your customer requirements to this matrix. So if you have tenants that have they've requested specific features, specific things, right? Now you can map those requirements to the matrix and keep track of who's using what and why they need that, and why you have these different variations supported there. And then the last point here is that we shouldn't forget that we need to be making trade-offs here, right? We shouldn't try to have one flavor that optimizes for everything. One configuration, one flavor that optimizes for everything is really one that optimizes for nothing, right? Two sides of the same coin. Maybe a good example is there's a lot of performance features which are usually at odds with availability features like live migration, which doesn't play well with things like SRIOV or huge pages, for example. So this consolidated view will help you keep track of that and help keep, it's easier to identify things like dependency conflicts or feature conflicts in that case. So then you want to, basically you want to create your workflow. In this example, we saw that there was no workflow or no process in place to manage the flavors. This, I realize, is probably too small to read the flow diagram. This is just an example, more to show that, just that you should think about what your processes will be probably different for different providers. And just some of the things you may want to think about in that regard are, so how your flavors tie into your customer onboarding process. You want to identify your customer needs, make sure that there's no surprises for them when they're onboarding, make sure that their needs can be satisfied. How you plan to handle new flavor requirements. Are you going to, expand your matrix, create another flavor, or will you update maybe an existing flavor with a new capability if that won't be disruptive to the other tenants already using that flavor? Having a method in your process to tell your customers no is pretty important as well. There is some area in the middle they need to meet you with, need to meet you at in some cases. So that's an important thing in your process to consider. Not everything is something you want to support that your customer necessarily asks for in your cloud. So, and then lastly, think about testing and integration of your flavor. In terms of if you have a CI/CD pipeline, think how that would tie into there, how you can automate testing for your different variations that you have. Some other considerations that we don't have time to go into more detail about. Your flavor naming conventions. This is important for reasons we saw earlier. Do you want, what happens when you have to go larger than X large? Do we go larger, largest? Or, so what's the plan there? So come up with a good scheme and then just stick to that naming scheme. So also in terms of automation, especially if you have a multi-cloud scenario and you have multiple environments, how do you think about the flavor lifecycle management for those environments and the automation for that? Heat templates may be a good way to orchestrate that in a multi-cloud scenario. Also, the documentation of your flavors is important. Even if we have consistent naming, what's the difference between, how will your tenants know what the difference between M1 something and M2 flavors are? There should be some page that you document that so that your tenants can get the most out of the options you're offering them. Then lastly, the compute host profile to flavor mappings. So it's worth keeping in mind that that's not always going to be a one-to-one relationship. And your cost is usually in the host profiles, a number of host profiles you have, rather than a number of flavors. In other words, you can have multiple flavors that actually go to the same compute hosts. But it depends on what types of features you're using. Some features are mutually exclusive, and then some can be combined together. So that's another thing that, going back to the flavor matrix, you will want to look at. So I think with that, we're good. So thank you for listening. Be happy to take any questions